Welcome back. We are joined by Einar Tangen, a senior fellow at the Teihe Institute and also a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, CIGI. So thank you for joining me from Lisbon today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Sorry about the time mix-up.
Well, we see that Trump, he ran on this idea of America first. Now, it's an interesting concept because it can be interpreted in many different ways. For some, it meant adjusting to multipolarity, so prioritize some regions, deprioritize others, to prevent the US from overexhausting itself and indeed incentivizing other great powers to collectively balance the US. Now, for others, restoring hegemony would be the alternative. So instead of adjusting to multipolarity, it's reversing it. So in this, you might expect cannibalizing different allies, outsourcing conflicts to proxies, turn adversaries against each other, and restore dominance. Now, I guess ambiguity is your friend when you want to get elected, because if you don't specify what you want to do, you can capture all these different ambitions. But once you're actually in power and this rhetoric has to be converted into specific policy, then the divisions will begin to emerge. And we're already seeing why some are now coming in conflict with others. That is, on day one, America first could mean ending the forever wars, and the next day, America first might mean that you have to destroy all America's adversaries in different wars. So we're seeing the splits now across the America firsters who seem to be looking at how to define this concept. How do you assess Trump's goal, though? Because I can seemingly put him a little bit in each category. That is, he does seem at some, he needs to prioritize some regions. He seems willing to deprioritize, for example, Europe. But at the same time, the hegemonic ambition seems to be quite strong. How do you view what is wider geopolitical strategy is for the United States?
Well, Glenn, the first thing I'd say is it's wrong to start analyzing Donald Trump in terms of policy. He doesn't really have one. If he had a policy, he would have passed healthcare reform many, many years ago after complaining about it for these 18 years. What you have to, Donald Trump, when he said "Make America Great Again," had this kind of revisionist, um, you know, going back to the future by somewhere in the 1950s or close to the 60s. And what he was doing with this political opportunist, was just simply saying to a large group of Americans, because remember, he did very well among the lower middle classes. They're not as educated, but they feel very strongly they've been victimized. And he uses a victimization character. That's his whole strategy. Everything is somebody else's fault. China's been ripped. I mean, the US has been ripped off by allies, by adversaries, by neighbors. Everyone's at fault. And it carries over to his own personal things where he's always the victim. At 28 and counting, sexual harassment accusations, all his bankruptcies, and most recently the fact that he was using his nonprofit to fund his political campaign and having to pay the $2 million back. So don't look at this. He is instinctual, and he has a kind of a political savant sense of how to get people engaging him. And that has been really the hallmark of success. If you start thinking about how he views the world, I think that's wrong. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't understand that there are African nations whose primary language is English. He doesn't really understand geography. He doesn't care. He ran on this kind of nativist, I'm going to lower your prices. I'm going to bring back jobs to America. That's what America first stood for. Now, those around him, they saw opportunities in this because they knew it would cause confusion. So I think the right way of putting that is that there are people around him, even in his cabinet. Darth Vance, as I call J.D. Vance, is somebody who really believes in this message of let's stir things up. Democracy hasn't worked. He's very, very much involved with Peter Thiel from Palantir, who's put hundreds of millions of dollars into promoting him. And they have this belief that it's time for a new nobility, a nobility of the technological class to, in essence, rule over mankind because mankind can't be trusted. They are good at throwing governments out, but they don't know what they want. It's impossible to have order. So this is like something out of the playbook of Star Wars. Here you have good versus evil, and you have the empire trying to assert itself. So right now, the split in the party is due to those who really feel that Donald Trump has their best, you know, whatever you want to call it, at heart interests. And they still feel very loyal to him, despite the mounting evidence that he doesn't seem to care. You're seeing farmers who are coming out and saying, look, this isn't what I was thinking of. I should have thought it through. It's going to deport all the people I was using to run my farms. And he said he was going to attack China. China's their biggest customer. And as I said, these are the people they rely on to run their farms. So they're now perhaps having some buyer's remorse. There's also the fact that he is spending a tremendous amount of time overseas. He's given $40 billion to his friend Milei. He's threatened Brazil with 30% tariffs because his friend Bolsonaro is going to jail for a very, very long period of time. So he likes to mix personal issues with politics, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just, I like this guy. I'm going to help him out. I like Bibi. I'm going to help him out, give him bombs and things like that. But I'll only give him so much. You can't kill everybody as long as my fingerprints are on it, or I have any hope of getting a Nobel Peace Prize. So, it's just, it always bothers me when people try to, like yourself, very rational people are trying to say, look, let's look behind the man and see what's there. There isn't. It's what you see is what you get. I mean, famously, when he was interviewed, there's a 5 hours of tapes. He was asked, do you ever reflect? And he says, no, because I might not like what I see. And this is the way it is. I mean, he's also admitted, I said, I wake up every day and I try to maximize that day. I don't think about the future or anything else. Just what can I get today? So this is not a man who deals in policy. And you can quite frankly, you can see it through his domestic agenda. What has he accomplished on a positive note? I mean, he hasn't built a wall. He's deporting immigrants left, right, and center. He's set these ICE agents on Americans. He's sent troops in. But are those solutions or are those just tactics?
Yeah, well, you're probably correct here. I guess I think I often make the point. It seems like this overarching response to America's decline or relative decline, say, it's not a strategic vision of its core strength, weaknesses, and the rivals out there. Instead, it seems to be the assumption that it's from the weaknesses of American leaders. So if you only have a strong leader, one familiar with the art of the deal, a businessman or a salesman who can use his skills for personal ties and also being able to wield both a carrot and a whip in terms of using maximum pressure, then you can kind of close the deal. I think this over focus on the personal touch and leadership as opposed to strategy is probably a mistake. And what's interesting with China though is he seems to overestimate the strength that the US is still in, that it's still maybe in the early 2000s or late 2000s, that is, it's still dominant but in decline. But again, the the ability to make the Chinese bow to his will. I think this is, well, he overestimated two things. One, I guess, would be the relative strength of the US, but also the ability of China to do this, because if they begin to do what he wants, the objective is more or less capitulation, it seems, much like he wants from all his other adversaries. But on that note, though, what do you see now happening with the ongoing economic war between the United States and China? Because, well, from where I'm sitting, it looks as if the race for AI has now resulted in a massive debt bubble linked in American data centers. And at the same time, we see the Chinese cutting dependence on chips. There's given that the industries are actually in China, they have better way of implementing the AI. The Americans do not have the same ability. How are you reading the situation? Or is it that or a bubble? Because so far it could be seen as a speculation, given that well, there's arguments going both ways.
Well, I think you see it perfectly. I mean, over 50% of the investment over the last year was into these data centers, and yet there is no proven model that shows that these will produce the kind of revenue that you know a return on investment would require. In China, they face the same problem. People rush to build data centers, and the government said, slow it down. You have data centers, but you don't have customers. You don't have products that can utilize these things. So China is going in the opposite direction. They're slowing their roll, yet they actually do have the power to run these data centers. In the U.S., you have a situation where they're building them, but they don't know how to power them. And in many communities, what they're doing is raising the electricity prices, which of course affects industry. So they depend on power. So it is not well thought out. And I think the term you're looking for is there's no end game. Donald Trump likes to get things moving, but there's not any kind of sense that they're going to arrive somewhere. And this is very true of what happened with China. This idea that rare earths wasn't known or wasn't strategically looked at is nonsense. The fact is, 30 years ago, this was discussed, and it was like, well, China's a subservient nation. We can, pollute their land, and they can do all this messy, nasty stuff, and then we'll get the products we want. The finished metals and things like this that we need to for our technology. Well, in 2008, there was a white paper put out by the Pentagon saying that, look, guys, we are totally dependent on China for these rare earths. Rare earths are critical, absolutely critical. There wasn't any kind of, we could do without them or something like that. And then in 2010, China and Japan got into a territorial dispute over Senkaku Islands, however you want to call them. And China didn't announce a ban of rare earths, but for some reason, no rare earths were reaching Japan. And Japan at that point was forced to make concessions, and they've been living in a kind of cold truce ever since. So we're talking 15 and 17 years ago, and yet Donald Trump is somehow surprised that this critical issue, which is linked to this over 50% of current investment in the United States, is linked to AI, is linked to defense systems, is somehow wholly dependent on the Chinese market. And it's overwhelming. People talk about 90% and all this stuff, but that's not the real number. The real number is 98%. That is the number of rare earth magnets, which are absolutely critical to everything from cars to gyroscopes, missiles, you name it. Without those, you're not going anywhere, and there's no existing capacity. Now, in 5 to 7 years, you could build up the capacity necessary for your strategic interests, e.g., military. But in the meantime, your car industry would basically go kaput. That would take 10 to 15 years. Does America have 10 to 15 years or 5 to 7 years to solve its problems? The answer is no. And that's why Donald Trump, with a lot of fanfare about running around to Australia, which does have a partial rare earths complex. There's four processes, basically, the mining and gathering, and then there's the separation, and then there's the processing. And there's two parts of the processing: light processing, which produces certain elements that are used within, everything that you're associated with chips, your glasses, the glasses on the front of your phone, and then the heavy processing, which really goes to these rare earth magnets. So there's nobody who has a complete chain except China, and you have 70% of the currently mined rare earths, but rare earths are in many places. That's not the issue. The issue is there's a lack of processing, in terms of sophistication. China is 10 to 15 years ahead of anybody else in terms of this kind of processing. Plus, they have the capacity to produce. So right now, Donald Trump finds himself regretting his actions because he didn't think about them. He didn't bother to inquire with anybody about what the consequences would be of saying no chips. And you'll remember, I don't know, this is kind of ironic. He said, well, I'm not going to allow any Boeing avionics to be sent to China. Well, that's really funny because Boeing won't be able to make these avionics because they don't have rare earths. So he's in essence saying, we're not going to sell you the stuff we can't make, which I would say sounds pretty hollow and silly. Anyway, he hasn't been able to figure out how to deal effectively with China. And it really irks him, but he is not ideological. He simply moves on, creates, it releases, as I say, a few dead cats every day, and a bunch of white rabbits, and the press runs around chasing after them. And they don't look at the main issues here, which is his madman tactics are creating a situation where there is absolutely no predictability. Unless you think you can make an investment and get a complete return, all of your capital back plus all your profit before Donald Trump goes, all right, in 3 years, it's very difficult to see how you're going to make a big investment. And that's what you see globally. So many countries appear to be knuckling under. They say, oh, I'm going to nominate you for a Nobel Peace Prize. Here's some gold baubles. Here's some deals for your children. We're going to make promises of big numbers that we're going to invest in the US, and then we're just going to wait it out. Investments that we're talking about. Parts in creating anything, you can always look for delays. That's exactly what most of them do.
Yeah, well, it looks like some of the key weaknesses, though, in terms of competing with China would be, as you said, within AI, the data centers. It's not just that there's a bubble, but as you point out, they're very energy intensive. And well, it's not just with the United States that energy costs are going up. This is very true across the world, with the exception of China, which has focused a lot on bringing online all this new energy resources. Um, but his approach also to the rare earths is quite interesting. Well, let's go with interesting, because it's as you said, it's as if this came out of nowhere. No one knew about this. Even 2 or 3 days ago, he made a speech, or not a speech, but he was making some comments in front of journalists, in which he argued, people don't know what magnets are, and all these things which people have been looking at how to secure the supply chains. And suddenly, this is the assumption is that no one knew about this. This is why one ended up in this trouble. I mean, I would have felt more comfortable in the political leadership in Washington if they kind of identified what went wrong. That's not that China came and took all the businesses, or nobody knew what a magnet was, but rather that you had this economic system where one outsourced a lot of the industries. One didn't focus on developing the energy infrastructure and all of these things. But to do it, you have to look at home. You have to look at the wrongful decisions that were made, the development of this financialized rent-seeking economy, all of these things. But it's not so attractive if the flaws are at home. It's much easier, I guess, to look outside who stole your greatness, because surely it's nothing you did. And I guess it also applies to the tariffs. I mean, I'm not categorically opposed to tariffs. I think if the US said we want to, for example, develop one or shipbuilding, like one specific industry, we realize that we can't build ships as competitive as the Chinese, so we'll put some tariffs on it to give some time for our manufacturers to develop the maturity, the quality and low cost to compete with the Chinese. So we're going to keep it at 10% flat for the next 20 years. And this is going to be give predictability, give investors the comfort to invest. But this new stuff, we'll use tariffs as a weapon to club you if you don't do as we say, if you don't release this, Bolsonaro from prison. I mean, it's just there's no structure. It's just this, as you said, this impulsive day-to-day reactions.
Well, Glenn, I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I do think there is a place for tariffs on developing and emerging nations who do not want their strategic industries or they want to home grow some of their own industries. They're not interested in having Amazon basically take them over and use them, as an appendage to the empire. But in terms of ships, my family built ships. We built 28 submarines in World War II. We built Great Lakes shipping, cranes, you name it. I can tell you, it sounds seductive. All right, we're going to put a tariff on, and that will allow our shipping industry to grow. Now, first off, it would have to be a lot higher than 10%. The workforce isn't there. You need welders, you need engineers, people who just don't exist anymore. If you go into America, you'll see that despite all of these issues about employment going down, if you look actually in industry, they have a deficit of workers, and it's based on people just don't know how to do the things that they need in terms of reading blueprints, welding, repairing machines, electronics experts. I mean, just wiring and things like this. So, unfortunately, what happens is you put that tariff on. That makes your ability to sell those ships internationally zero. So maybe some American companies will say, okay, we can do that. The life of a ship in real terms is about 15 to 20 years. So you'd have one basically generation of ships that you could rely on in terms of doing that with this ongoing subsidy. There would have to also be a subsidy not only to build them, but to sell them internationally. Because people just say, well, I can buy a Chinese ship for, one third, 2/3 of that price. And, therefore the shipping using um, that ship, it's a lot cheaper to ship things because obviously, I'm going to have to charge for the ship if I'm transporting things. So it doesn't actually work out in that area. But as I said, if you're an emerging nation, you're trying to protect your agriculture, you're trying to grow local industries and software and things like that, incentives, state action, tariffs, and things like that can help protect your market. But once you become a developed country, once you start using tariffs, when you're at the top of the game, all you're doing is protectionist measures to try to allow your entities to go forward. But people should not think that the only issue that China has, I mean, in terms of things that it can use as pressure on the U.S., are these rare earths. Yeah, it's very important. It's a high priority. But if you want to make cars, you need these kind of legacy chips. And the vast majority of them are over 50% of the market is in China. This is where they're made. They're inspected, they're packaged, they're sent. Without those, not producing any cars. Could you start up factories to make them? Sure, 2, 3 years. Meanwhile, you do not have an auto industry, and everybody in that is going to go out of a job. Chemicals, everything from the chemicals that are used in processing, chemicals that are used in medicine, chemicals that are used in any kind of household cleaning. All these things, majority made in China. Vitamins, I remember I came here 30 years ago to China, and I discovered that 98% of the vitamin C in the world was made in China. I'm sure it hasn't changed much since. And the reason is, people are watching this. They say, well, why is China ahead? What are they doing? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. Chinese companies are willing to take lower returns. So an American company, European company, they really have to be around 8% to be bankable. Means they have to show their business plan that they plan to have at least 8% return on their investment. And then the banks will say, okay, yeah, this is reasonable. It's on the low end, but we will lend you money. We'll give you a credit facility. In China, they're willing to go 2, 3, 4, 5%. So they go after low margin businesses where it's all about economies of scale. And the Western companies, even absent the lower labor costs and the lower construction and operating costs, lower energy costs, they can't match it up, even if everything was equalized, because it's just not bankable in the Western system. So you also have strategic metals. There are some metals that China, once again, has about 99% of the markets. And without these, all right, you cannot produce missiles and chips and all sorts of things. And then you start getting into necessities. China, you're not going to separate from China. All the clothes you think are made somewhere else, whether it's Bangladesh, India, or wherever. Well, guess what? The cloth made in China, the thread made in China, the zippers made in China, buttons made in China. All right, the sewing machines that they're using in Bangladesh and all these places where they made in China. So, even the little tag at the back of your sweater or shirt, that's also made in China. So you have all of these intermediate goods, which are, they can be taken anywhere and you can have value added labor adding to them. But the fact is, you're still supporting the Chinese economy. And if anyone has doubts about this from an economic point of view, I suggest they look at the decrease in trade edge in China, but the increase in trade with ASEAN and other entities who have had an increase of exports to the United States, including places like Mexico. There's a direct correlation between Vietnam and Mexico and the amount of new things that they're importing from China and the increase in the exports from their countries to the United States. So it's kind of a hodgepodge. It's the old Gordian knot. That was the knot that had so many ends, but if you pull on one end, it just makes the ball of twine you know hard, harder and more difficult to undo. It's all interconnected, and this is the world as it is. Donald Trump doesn't want to understand this. He just says, we're big, we'll go in, we'll bully people. They'll have no choice but to give in. And that has worked for the vast majority of nations. No one wants to take the U.S. on directly. Look at India. They're still reeling. They don't know what they did wrong. They were, an essential cog in the machine that was going to curtail China's rise. And now, after interference in their general election, after getting closer to Pakistan with kind of nonsensical deals and having the leadership go back and forth, claims that really run at the heart of Modi's strongman image, claiming that he is the one who settled the conflict between Pakistan and India. And then you have two color revolutions that were in Bangladesh and Nepal. These are things where, and then the 50% tariffs, these are things they don't understand. But, if you're looking at this strategically, tactically from Donald Trump's point of view, you can always tell what he's afraid of because he'll mention it. He'll say, oh, BRICS. No one believes in BRICS. BRICS is dead. Well, BRICS isn't dead. BRICS is expanding as a line of countries that want to join it because the only thing these countries can do is band together regionally or in larger entities in order to kind of counteract, uh, the influence of the U.S. and to the markets that are not connected to the U.S. So, I mean, it's very noticeable. South Africa, right? They've gotten these big tariffs, 30%, plus being singled out for being a racist country. Kind of ironic, given that it was the victim of apartheid, not the perpetrator of it. You have Brazil, 50% tariffs because, he's very much in love with his counterpart there, Bolsonaro. You have India, 50% tariffs. You have China, which he would like to put, 137% tariffs on. Russia, who's already. So what's the pattern here? Well, they're all bricks, aren't they? He knows and fears because he is a bully. He does not want a bigger bully. And he's afraid that these countries will come to their senses, perhaps join with the EU, and come to Washington and say, knock it off. You can have tariffs on your people. That's up to you. But you cannot lock all of us into this kind of death spiral where we're bidding against each other in order to support the United States. I mean, that's the typical colonial attitude. How do I get the natives fight among themselves and then just pick off whatever it is I want? So far, that hasn't happened. But with China standing up, with Russia continuing on, there's a danger in Trump's mind that these people will come together and then it's game over. He will do what he's known for, which is taco. Trump always chickens out. So if that happens, he's going to have to readjust, figure out who is at fault after that, and beat up some more immigrants, and do away with birthright citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. But internationally, it'll be finished. He'll be collecting revenues through tariffs, which are, hit his own people hardest. Just like, these things that he's doing with healthcare right now are hitting his base hardest. What was it? Almost 80% of all the counties that went for Trump, the highest numbers. Guess what? They're the highest recipients of SNAP or food stamps. So, and these are the people who voted overwhelmingly for him. Now, in terms of numbers, there are more numbers because cities have more people. But when you start talking about his base, he's undermining it with these healthcare issues, which are going to hit these people really hard. Many of them are going to experience 50% increases, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. I don't know if you saw the statistics that came out, but 68% up from 63% of Americans are now living paycheck to paycheck. 50% of all of the economy in terms of retail is being supported by 10% of the United States. So you have this vast inequality, and Donald Trump hasn't done anything to help it. In fact, he's actually made it worse. So you can anticipate that they will turn on him, and it's not going to be a pretty one. This is a situation where if I don't like you and you do something at me and say, well, I always knew you were a bad guy. But if I thought you were my savior and it turns out you're not, I'll feel betrayed. People who feel betrayed, emotionally betrayed, tend to be the most violent. And you start looking at domestic cases of violence and death and murder, things like this, are generally because somebody feels that they were betrayed, their expectations not met. And the people that have loved them in the past also love their guns. They think the United States is on the wrong track. They believe that the system is rigged and that they have no connection to it. These people lose hope. It's going to be very, very, very nasty. And the first people we're going to turn on is themselves. And you're already starting to see that. A lot of his pundits have turned against him because of the Epstein files, because of his adventuresome overseas. They said you were elected to take care of of home, to take care of people here, not to be running around the world trying to get a peace Nobel Prize. So there's a lot of disappointment out there. We have yet to see the worst of it. So it's going to be not a great Thanksgiving for many Americans, and it's going to be a worse Christmas. And when that happens, after Christmas, you're going to start to see people really feeling the pinch, and you're going to start to see change. And by next year's midterm elections, you can expect it doesn't matter how many gerrymandering, they do. Gerrymandering is when you go in and you change the lines for election of not senators, it's just two per state, but House of Representatives. You can change all that, but if the majority populace is against you, it's not going to help you. And I expect him to experience a severe downturn in terms of losses of majority in the Senate, loss of majority in the House of Representatives. And the question in many people's minds with him sending troops into cities, especially Democratic ones, claiming that the voting system is rigged and all this, is that this is in preparation for actually seizing control of the electoral process and just saying nullifying it, canceling it, or afterwards claim that was so much fraud, as he has done before, that he is not going to accept the election results, and therefore he will cancel it and keep the existing Congress in. Question is, how do Republicans react to that? And I think that might be a bridge too far for many of them who still believe that America is a democracy.
It's this tendency, though, of Trump that is when things aren't going well at home, just to go abroad and try to take credit for solving the world's problems. This is something we also see among the European leaders, though, from Britain to Germany, France. When things go horribly at home, they spend all their focus on foreign policy, pretending that they're standing up to a tyrant and making little Napoleons out of themselves. I like your comments on the shipbuilding, because I think this kind of is a good point, that if tariffs would work, it would have to work in concert with all these other things. That is, one would have to build up the actual supply chains, the skill set. So all of this would be a very complex process, which would take years and years. But it doesn't really have that quick fix, the microwave solution, which Trump is looking at often. That if he just waves his hand, people will respect him and fear his strength, and peace will fall up into place. I mean, China, for example, with the rare earths and all, spent 25 plus years on developing the processing, refinement, and uh, and the solution by the Trump administration was to ask for a 1 year pause. So, which Besant says, oh, well, in this 1 year we'll build up the capabilities, and then we'll more or less return to the fight, and then we're not dependent on China. It's very this idea of having the simple solutions. It is interesting, but this is I think you're also right on why it's important that the Chinese are now standing up to Trump, because he has become the president of low-hanging fruit. That is, when he push these threats, countries who fall in line, like the Europeans, they really get clobbered now. They are in a very difficult spot. Meanwhile, the countries like China, who stands up, he kind of backs off and walks away. And so it should be more or less clear now that the price of falling in line is, often can be more severe than whatever Trump threatens with. I did, though, want to ask about, you mentioned what he fears the most is, of course, what he has to denigrate. So he says BRICS is already finished. Countries are leaving. This is not even a narrative. These are facts, factually wrong. This is there's no one is leaving. The line, the queue to join is only growing. So, but some of these sanctions, though, they are real. They do pose a real economic threat, and especially the oil sanctions on the Russians, which effectively are, well, they're secondary sanctions. So there are sanctions on China, India, and others. Do you see that Russia, China, India, as these three Eurasian giants, are able to stick together, or do you see the Chinese and Indians beginning to back away a bit from Russian energy to, I guess, avoid some of the harshest punishments from the United States?
Well, India is an interesting case because, as I said, they really don't understand why there's been this major shift. I mean, it wasn't just all the things that I mentioned in terms of the color revolutions, interference, and things. He had Peter Navarro on a daily basis just excoriating Modi and India, that they're responsible for the war in Ukraine, that they have to be getting a free ride, that they, not democratic. I mean, it's just very, very personal attacks. And obviously, Navarro is, kind of nutty uncle that you keep in the out of sight unless you want him, to just act the way he does, which is unhinged. Um, so, they were hoping when Modi came to Tianjin for the sideline meetings with Putin and also with Xi. Putin and Xi were hoping that he was coming there to, in essence, say, okay, it's time to get BRICS together, and we need to act, and we should, we've India's always been what I call the balancing entity within BRICS, SCO, other organizations, where it tends to take a very conservative, pro-American view. But given the kind of abuse he was suffering, they were hoping that he was going to stand up and say, look, we need to get together and put this bully in his place. I see that, as you said, if you stand up to him, being a classic bully, he backs down with a whimper and says, oh, I wasn't interested in you anyways. And there was a golden opportunity. But in, Jay Shelter, who runs their 225 plan before it became um, kind of difficult, and he was moved to India. He's an American citizen. Seems to be very, very close with Washington, and he was still holding out hope that the key was to leverage, the perception of closeness to Putin and Xi with Washington to get some sort of reasonable concessions. I mean, the biggest issue for Modi, it's an absolute red line, is the fact that Trump has insisted that they open up agriculture in both their dairy and also, they're growing, grains and things like that to the United States. That would have a massive effect. These farmers who comprise over 50% of India would, of course, they would vote for any party except Modi's in that case because they see their livelihood going away. And that would be the enemy. I mean, it's a physical impossibility. I shouldn't say physical, a political impossibility for Modi to do that. Yet, the U.S. is pushing that. So right now, it is still India on the fence, trying to figure out what to do next. You'll note that Modi has been fairly quiet, except with this new terrorist attack at the Red Fort, which the Pakistanis are claiming the Indians is a false flag operation by India itself in order to divert attention from the fact that their foreign policy is not working out well and their domestic policy is not working out well. And these tariffs of course, aren't going to help. So, Russia and China would love to have India join the group. Obviously, Brazil would be interested. South Africa has nothing to lose, although they tend to be a little more reticent. But with the more pressure that Trump puts on these countries, what do they have to lose? And if they, as you pointed out, they see China standing up and everything gets good. They've actually handled Trump, and the whole world knows it. Maybe it's time that they say, okay, we all come together and we do a swift deal. We say the U.S. has said, listen, we're not going to accept your liquefied natural gas. We're going to start taxing your services, which is your one bright spot in terms of your exports, and we're going to put tariffs on what you do. Why would this be great? Well, think about it this way, Glenn. Who makes all the stuff that America makes? Europe. So if there were, in fact, tariffs on American goods, European goods would now suddenly be able to overcome a lot of their deficits, not entirely on energy, but at least in terms of giving themselves some breathing room to recover. And if their leadership realizes that this would probably be the only way that they can pull themselves out of this hole that they've dug themselves into, it might behoove them to come together with BRICS and just tell Trump to knock it off. And what I mean by that is they just go to Washington and they say, look, you can have whatever tariffs you want on your people. It's a regressive tax, but that's your business. But you're not going to have us at differential levels. If you wanted 20% across the board, fine. It's meaningless in the sense that there'll be less U.S. demand because of the cost. But in terms of the world, it'll be the same. Everyone will be sent something to the U.S. It's 20%. It's just an increase in prices. It's inflationary for the United States. They're not violating the sovereignty of the U.S. They're simply drawing a line around what the U.S. can do internationally to pressure other countries. And that is their right to come together and do this. In theory, it should have been done in the UN or at the WTO. The U.S. has nobbled the WTO by not allowing any appellate judges to be appointed. Therefore, there's no finality in any decision that is made if either country or countries to the part to the case want to appeal. There's no finality. And obviously, having the veto power at the Security Council allows the U.S. to, with impunity, defy the world as they have done over Gaza and continue to. So we're at the situation where the international institutions that were actually created after World War II, much at the behest of the United States, under attack. They're not capable of acting in this situation. So invariably, the only solution is if the countries rise up together and just say, look, enough of this nonsense.
It does feel like we're always getting closer to the end of the line. It's well, again, it's by definition a very unsustainable path the U.S. has put itself on. And again, I think this efforts to always go for the quick fix. It that results in trying to do too much at the same time. For example, with India, if they could be, showered in all promises of great trade relations and deepening ties, but there's one area where they have to change their policies, put pressure, for example, on oil, it would be one thing, then they can pressure it. But going after everything at the same time, that's agriculture, their energy. I mean, it becomes impossible to comply and to work with the US, and it also sends a clear signal that if you give an inch, they will come for everything. So it's oh, I it's often good optics, this going for this little victories here and there, but when it all comes together, it's yeah, this is quite dangerous. It might sink the entire economy here. So but thank you for taking the time. I know you're here in Lisbon now, so with a full schedule ahead. So thank you again for taking the time.
Well, thank you, Glenn, for having me. It's always a pleasure and always good to hear the questions. They're actually, I think, in most cases, more interesting than my answers.
Well, thanks. I'm not sure if I agree, but thanks anyways.